Good afternoon, my name is Ola Tamanova and I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform. Today is day 481 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor, and now we will be talking about the situation in Kherson region. Joining us online is Yuriy Sobolevskyi, first deputy head of Kherson Regional Council. Mr. Yuriy, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Mr. Yuriy, we've seen a terrible footage of this night's strike of Kherson region. If we may, please, let's talk about the consequences. Look, the security situation is still complicated. The enemy doesn't cease the shelling during the night and in the day. All of the west bank of Kherson region, where the enemy can reach with their cannon, artillery, mortars and MLRS, they continue doing it, and they continue doing it on a permanent basis. But I want to say, that thanks to the Ukrainian armed forces successful actions, we have a lower number of shellings that it could be. I think that the local residents, they perfectly see it, how our guys work, how they destroy the positions of the enemy from where the shellings are launched against our citizens. Within the last day, unfortunately, we had one casualty. As of 1 hour ago, there were no reports of any casualties, either dead or injured as a result of the strike, but there was a damage of the civil infrastructure. There were projectiles incoming in one of the transport companies. A number of civilian vehicles were destroyed there. There were residential buildings, administrative facilities damaged, but fortunately no casualties. Well, talking about the situation in the very city of Kherson, what is the security situation over there? Well, it is complicated as well, because the enemy continues shelling the city of Kherson, and right as we're speaking, we hear the artillery working outside. That's our artillery, fortunately, but still the denizens of Kherson are hearing that kind of sound all the time, during daytime and during nighttime. Again, the shellings will continue as long as the enemy will be able to use those types of weapons that I've mentioned already. Well, Mr. Yuriy, talking about the consequences of the horrible terroristic act committed by Russians, I mean the detonation of Kakhovskaya Dam. So has the water subsided already? How many settlements are still flooded? What do you know about the number of casualties of this terroristic act? Well, look, the water level is going down. As of now, the average level of water is below 1 meter, but 5 populated areas are still partially flooded, which account for about 800 residential buildings. The water has not subsided yet from there. As soon as it does, the pyrotechnics start working in those areas. More than 3 dozens of them, not only the specialists from Kherson region, because we also had specialists engaged from all over Ukraine. The law enforcement agencies proceed right after the pyrotechnics. They document the consequences of this terroristic act, the losses and damage, and then they are being superseded by the environmentalists, state emergency service personnel, and the utility service personnel. So the utility services, they mitigate the consequences, they remove everything that was left by the water, the biological waste that are being disposed of in a special way, so that we have a normal epidemiologic situation. It's under control for the time being. We have no grounds to assume that we have any threats of epidemics in Kherson region, but the medical institutions involved in this process, they work in increased intensity mode. They are all provided with their basic necessities. They have everything to be able to react promptly to mitigate the consequences. We're talking about the losses and damage calculation. Do we have any preliminary results? And also the question is about the water. Do we sample the water, and if so, what are the results of such sampling? Yeah, the water is being sampled 24/7. The analysis the results of the tests, they are in open access, so we understand that the composition of the water is such that currently it cannot be used other than for the technical needs, and again very cautiously, because there may be some contaminants detected in that water, something that would not be affecting your health in a positive way. Regarding the number of casualties, I would like to wait, because we have some preliminary data, but not in all cases the cause of death is identified, so we need first this legal procedure to be over, and then the law enforcement agencies or the military administration will report regarding the finalized number of people who died as victims of this terroristic act. And now we're only talking about the West Bank of Kherson region. We understand that there is no access to objective information from the East Bank of Kherson region, and everything is way worse there. Mr. Yuriy talking about the flooding of residential and non-residential areas. Do we understand how many buildings and facilities were flooded? Will we have such calculations? Will we count it in thousands? There are thousands of buildings that were affected by flooding, and we will have to perform the technological testing and examination to understand, are they still safe for use, or they require some repair works to be done because the foundations and walls were flooded. Plus we have to take into account that those are the different types of structures, different technologies of construction. In some cases they survived this flooding with no significant consequences, and in other buildings the flooding will result in some significant destruction. And only after the water falls to the level that existed before this terroristic act, the examination of all of the buildings will be possible, so we can calculate the final amounts of losses, because a lot of private property was flooded and destroyed in the same way the communal property and state property was flooded too, and the finalized calculations will be available only after the water subsides. Mr. Yuriy, we know that the biggest problem for the civilians is pumping the water from their land plots and their private houses. So to what extent we were able to cope with this problem, maybe in percentage, how many water was already pumped? Well, I'm not ready to give you the percentage because a huge number of buildings is still flooding, so I cannot tell you how much water is needed to be pumped so far. But I know that all the resources available to State Emergency Service and the volunteers, they are all engaged in pumping this water. So this work is underway in this very moment. And we will continue pumping until we bring their homes back into the conditions before the terroristic act. What do we know about the East Bank? Do we have at least any information what's going on with the citizens in the East Bank of Kherson region? Well, the humanitarian situation is way worse there because the occupational authorities failed the evacuation completely within 1 day after the detonation. They did not do anything at all. They made their first statement only after lunch on the first day about any evacuation actions to be undertaken there. For the time being, the people still have a lot of problems there. The support programs implemented by the occupational authorities, in fact, they only cover the citizens of Russian Federation. So people who were affected by this flooding, they first should get the Russian passport, and only then they will be able to get something from this authority. The first payment, I think, it seems like they're ready to give that disbursement to everybody, but the main compensation programs, they are only being provided in exchange for Russian passport. The humanitarian support and sanitary procedures in the buildings are on the minimum level. They make some propagandistic footage for their channels, but in the majority of the settlements, what's going on there, people are left there on their own, and they try to solve their problems on their own, including the evacuation and access to the buildings that where the water has already subsided and the sanitary processing was not completed on the necessary level. So the risk of epidemics is real in the east bank of Kherson region. Thank you very much for this information, dear colleagues. If you have any questions, please proceed. Good afternoon, Irina Momchur, Ukrinform. I'm having 3 questions. We have report from the east bank, from the occupied part of Kherson region. The people are saying that the occupiers ordered the people to write the number of the casualties on the fences of their homes. Do you know how true is this information? Why would they do it? What is their goal? And another question, you mentioned that we have very limited amount of information from the left bank, from the east bank, so maybe if not in numbers, so at least can you tell us in what populated areas the situation is the most critical in the east bank, where the people's property was damaged to the bigger extent? Well, regarding this thing, you're saying that they want the people to write the number of casualties on the fences. What the information that we have is that they intentionally complicate all the processes related to the registration of death of the people as a result, which resulted from this terroristic act, to get the proper statistics, the statistics convenient for them, more positive, so to say, for them, so that the inactivity of the occupational authority can be confirmed or otherwise not confirmed or not verified by these statistics. And also the information that we're getting about the representatives of this occupational authority, that they just come to the homes of the people and they ask if there are corpses to be evacuated, if they hear about people who are sick, who are immobilized, so they don't care. So maybe this information about the number of the people killed on the fences, they just want in this way to facilitate their task. I don't have such information that they require people to write something on the fences, but that's quite probable in the view of other details that we're getting from there. Regarding the casualties, probably the most number of catastrophic reports were coming from Sobolevskyi. Sobolevskyi was damaged to the biggest extent, probably. Well, another question is about one of aid provided to the people who were affected by this terroristic act committed by Russians. Could you please tell us, the mechanism now is such that the people are supposed to collect a number of certificates and provide the paperwork to the local administrations or local councils, and then they would be able to get this aid. But such people are numerous, and obviously it creates some queues, some crowds. Haven't you considered any process to facilitate this activity? Do you plan any facilitation, either by using DIA or Otherwise, well, I know that it's responsibility of the military administration, and I know that they were trying to facilitate this procedure to the maximum extent possible, and there was an order to the local administrations, to the heads of the communities, so that they communicate to the maximum extent to the peoples, they explain everything to the people and help in processing those documents, so it doesn't happen in a way like, you know, that there is a declaration that the aid is coming, but then finally nobody knows how to get it. We understand that any concentration of the people in the areas close to the Dnipro River, at least 20 kilometers in the depth from the bank, is the legal target for the enemy. As soon as they see a concentration of vehicles or people, it increases significantly the risks of the enemy projectiles incoming in that area. So I agree with you that we should avoid such situations to the maximum extent. Well, but whether there will be some automation of this procedure through some electronic means or something, you don't have any information about that. I don't have any such information, but I advise everybody to keep track of the official reports of Kherson Military Regional Council, and I think that this information will be posted there as soon as relevant decision will be taken. Thank you very much. And another question, maybe we're not thinking about it at this very moment, we're thinking about pumping water and mitigating of the consequences of this terroristic act, but generally Kherson region has lost its irrigation system. In fact, do you think what the local authorities should be doing to make sure that people stay there, stay working in their region? We understand that Kherson region is an agrarian region. It's an area of the risky harvesting. People were using irrigation there all the time. How can we keep people there? What should we do next? Well, look, according to the information that I have, this matter is being worked upon. We understand it cannot be solved on the regional level. It can be solved with the resources of Kherson region itself. But the fact that the consequences are terrible and they will persist for more than 1 year, that's clear to everybody. What we still don't understand is the nature and scale of the damage and losses, because it has industrial and environmental components. But we know that now we consider the options, or I would say for restoration of Kakhovskaya HPP dam, because it has to be reconstructed, and for what I know, there are modern technologies of construction existing that would allow doing this given the proper financial resources. And after the victory of Ukraine, after the end of the battle operations, you know, there were first statements that it would require at least 5 years after the victory to reconstruct, but we have to understand that even as soon as it's rebuilt, it will require additional 2 to 3 years to renew the level of water in the water reservoir. This is what the specialists are saying now, but we have to work on it, because no one would let Kherson region to turn into a desert, obviously, and all that attention from the whole world to this catastrophe. I think that we will be able to engage a necessary number of organizations and foreign partners of Ukraine who will help Ukraine in doing it, because it's really a terrible act of terrorism which was unprecedented within the last 10 years in the world, something that Russia has committed here in Kherson region recently. Thank you very much for this broadcast, dear colleagues. I'm reminding you joining us was Yuriy Sobolevskyi, the first deputy head of Kherson Regional Council, and at 3:30 we will be talking about the situation in Kharkiv region, so stay tuned, work together for our victory, and thank our armed forces, and glory to Ukraine.